high school. So we four have stuck together since then. Through all the years, most of us have remained here in Montauk or East Hampton. Nancy was away for a while, but is a strong drawer in Montauk, and she's back here again, probably for the rest of her life. I think the purpose of this interview is to remember our beginnings in Montauk. We were born in Queens, Whitestone, and College Point, but my dad had a firm belief that we needed to be out here in the summer. He was a city fireman, and he had a fear of polio, and he didn't want us swimming in areas in the city where there were crowds and the transference of polio. So he made a heroic effort every summer to get us all out here. We were 5 children within 7 years of age of each other, and there wasn't a lot of money, of course, in the family, but I can remember the tent that we used to camp at Hither Hills State Park, lying on the lawn before we came out, and he would be waterproofing that tent, and then everything would get rolled up and packed in a homemade trailer and hitched on to one of the old cars we had, and we would start out from Montauk the day after school ended, and we'd bump along Northern Boulevard and out onto Jericho Turnpike. It was a long journey. We started early in the morning, about 6 o'clock, and by the time we got here, we were pretty well worn out, but we still had a tremendous amount of work to do, as did my parents. Everything had to be unpacked, and the tent had to be assembled before nightfall, because that's where we were sleeping. So that was a joint effort by everyone. Even the littlest of us, Dolly, had her part to do. I don't remember my first coming to Montauk, of course. I was told that I was only several months old, and I came out here. My mom and dad had come out here earlier before we were born as a result of Lil and Ed Golden's influence, who were our neighbors in Whitestone, and they came to Montauk to camp at the state park, which was a very uninhabited area at that time. It didn't have the strong draw that it has now. I understand that you have to win a lottery in order to camp at the state park now. At that time, very few people made that long journey to Montauk to camp here. But they came out and they had some good years here, and this was the place my dad wanted us to be. So there we would be, setting our tent up, putting everything out. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the stuff that we had there that made our life doable for my mother. Dad had made a icebox, a literal icebox, with a tin lining that you had to put blocks of ice in periodically in order to keep the foods cold. And the ice came from Duryea's Ice House. My dad wasn't here all the time, of course. My mother would be here with us. No car, as many of the women were. It was pretty common. I think it was Dugan's that used to come around with the bread and the cakes and things, and that was a highlight of the afternoon, Dugan's coming. And if we were lucky, we would get a little treat for dinner, like cupcakes, a box of cupcakes or something. The ice was called the ice detail. And when the men would come out on Saturday morning, they would line up, the call would go right down the line. Okay, men, fall out, ice detail. And all the men would come out, and off they would go with the car, a couple of cars, to get the ice blocks for the various ice boxes. And they would be gone for hours, because fortunately or unfortunately, the Blue Mullen was close by. And they would buy the ice first, which was not a good idea probably, and they never caught on to that. And there the ice would sit on the back bumper in the summer.
They never meant to stay so long.
Yeah, right.
They were coming right back.
And sometimes that ice would come back and it would just be held on precariously by a little band of ice yet. It had melted down onto the old fenders of the car, the bumpers rather, and which were metal, so they held the heat very nicely. And they would get back with these blocks of ice, and I don't know, it seems like the wives were very accommodating. They didn't seem to mind. Because then that evening, they would all go to East Hampton to load up on the groceries at the A&P and the Bohacks for the week's food. So it was kind of a social event, going for the ice in the morning and going for the groceries later in the afternoon. Our routine at the state park at the camp was, in the mornings, you get up. Mother had a very large wash tub out in the back. We had to go for water. There wasn't water at the individual sites at that time. And we would have to go to wherever the pump was. Maybe every 8 or 10 plots had water, shared the pump or the faucet, spigot. And we would go, fill the buckets, bring them back, regular water brigade back and forth, to fill this wash tub, which would, during the course of the day, warm up in the sun, and it would become the bathing place for any children that couldn't shower in the shower that was provided. It would become the place for the laundry to be done. That would all be put in after the bathing, and people would stomp on it, including us. It was great fun. And then Mother would wring it and rinse it and hang it up, and it could be dry in the morning. In the camp, the tent, we started with a wall tent, a largish wall tent. Eventually, Dad built bunk beds of pipe iron, or iron pipes, double beds, in some cases single beds, two tiers. We could accommodate a lot of people in that tent, and we did have a lot of visitors.
We did accommodate a lot of people because
Yes.
everybody came out to visit.
Yes.
And it was a long trip, so they stayed overnight, of course.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we'd wake up in the morning and there would already be people in the back of our area waiting to see us. Remember, Nana and Grandpa would come out with all their Russian friends, and they would be out there already cooking, unloading loads of food that they had brought with them, and it would just be a jolly time for 2 or 3 days while they were there. But during the regular week routine, remember, we didn't need many clothes because we'd get up in the morning and put our bathing suits on.
We didn't need any clothes except for Sunday morning church.
Right.
And then we had to also put shoes on, which was painful.
That was bad. You're right.
I do remember that apparently our feet had grown from June to August or September, and the shoes did not fit, but we did have to wear them.
And going back to school in the fall was
That was
torture
bad
too. Right. But you put your bathing suit on, have your breakfast, do whatever chores you had to do for Mom, and go off to the beach, the ocean beach, where there were lifeguards, handsome guys, remember, college guys, and we would look up at them and really admire them, and they loved that adulation too.
But the lifeguards were also like the doctors and the nurses in the camp because there was nothing else there. I do remember going there to be treated for a serious sunburn, which since a lot of
Tea bags. Right,
tannic
tea bags.
acid.
Mm-hmm, the tannic acid and the tea bags, right. And it was like a community.
It was a community.
You had the same neighbors every year, the same people came back. We were D3, and they all had the same plots. And there was a little grocery store, a little general store, and one night a week, I believe it was, we had square dancing, and everybody in the camp would go and square dance. They still do square dancing.
Yes, they do.
And then there was, for a time, a couple of ladies.
Ah, yes.
Remember them?
Yes, I do.
I don't remember their names. And they would come and take us, kind of like a daycare type thing, and
They were
were they of a religious group?
religion, and they had a little portable organ, and
Yes.
they taught us all these Protestant songs. We were Catholic.
The mother didn't
We
mind.
didn't tell anybody. And they'd entertain us or teach us the songs. I don't
Right.
remember so much
Keep us
religious
busy.
instruction there.
Mm-hmm.
2 ladies, yeah.
Mhm.
I don't remember their names either.
And many of the people that camped there are now permanent residents of Montauk. You know, the Mullers.
The Mullers were one.
Yes, Mr. Muller was a milkman, so he would bring milk when he came out and share it with everyone. He worked for Borden's, I think.
B.
Harry
Riley.
Clemens,
B.
the
Riley
Rileys, yes.
and her family at the time.
Yes, which is now Tammy Snow would be her
Granddaughter.
descendant. Harry Clemens' family. And then at night, remember what fun it was at night?
Yeah.
There were no fears for the children. And all of the kids in the area would go out and play at night, tag, hide and seek, just run crazy, go over to the playground area, barefoot of course, and sometimes that would be a problem. I remember stepping on some bees once, and my foot was pretty painful for a couple of days while those bee stings receded. But that was great fun fun too, and we formed friendships then that kind of lasted through the years, especially with the people that are out here now that we know.
Well, because we all shared the same memories of
Yeah,
Hither Hills.
yeah, Kurt Noglock.
And it was very depressing when they changed that you could not stay the entire summer. You were only entitled to 2 weeks.
That was
And that was about 1950,
50.
51, 52, something like that.
But I remember changing our campsite. So
Yes.
Yes, okay,
We
so
stayed 2
in the
weeks in
beginning,
one.
2 weeks at one and then 2 weeks at
I
another.
had to go to another.
Yeah.
Well, by that time too, Dad had made
Yeah.
a
Oh,
wall, a
okay.
wooden wall structure for our tent so that it was more sturdy. Remember, he made the bottom part was walls and then the canvas roof supported by the piping structure that he had. It was very self-sufficient. And, you know, after growing up and marrying and having children of my own, I can admire Mom and Dad for what they did. It was a heroic effort to get us out here. And my mom to live out here sometimes with a baby, with cloth diapers and all,
Yeah.
and no hot running water, no water at the site at all. We had to haul the water over. I don't ever remember her complaining. No car. The campers were wonderful though. They helped each other, they
Yeah.
supported each other.
But life was much simpler then. We didn't worry about where our Game Boys were if we had batteries or our radios. No, seriously,
Yeah, I know.
life was very simple. We made our own entertainment. We didn't even worry about
Right, games at night, board games
Crayons
at night, that
and-
kind of thing.
No, even going to the beach, all the paraphernalia that the kids bring to the beach
Yeah,
today.
we just went.
And Mom would fill the bathtub up in the morning, remember?
Mhm.
So the water
Water
would be warm for the evening.
Yeah.
Right, that's right, it was such fun. Wonderful memories. And then when they instituted the 2-week rule, George Andrade stepped forward and talked to my dad and some of the other people and said, I have this tract of land, Ditch Plains, and I'd be willing to allow, to lease it for
Campers.
camping. And so that all evolved. What is now the trailer park there evolved as a campground.
But weren't those cabooses over there then?
I don't know if they were there then or if he moved them over there, if he bought them and moved them
They
over.
were there when we
rented
went
them.
there to stay.
Were they?
Yes.
I remember, Judy.
And I don't know where they came from.
I think you could buy them, you owned them.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think they came from somewhere over where the hangar dock was, but I'm not sure.
They were railroad cabooses.
Cabooses, yeah.
They had a
They
bit
could
of,
have come from anywhere.
Yeah.
yeah. But again, a whole little community
Small.
formed there. We were older. I had a job in town then, working at the diner, and I would walk out to the main road to get into my job, which I think I had to be there about 6:30 in the morning. Fortunately, there was a young woman along Ditch Plains Road who also had to work at, Joan, what was the name of the place you worked at? Nesh's, another food place in town. And Joan had a car. She was allowed to drive. You don't remember that? I remember you giving me rides to work in the morning. We were of an age, and 16, and often you would give me a ride down into town. I remember that very well.
Or I remember Bert Ryan, who was the one and only policeman we had, also giving you a ride.
Coming and knocking on the door and saying, Pat,
You're
they're waiting
late
for
for
you at the
work.
diner.
And that's how it went. We had one policeman.
I remember that.
And he
Yeah.
knew everybody. Bert Ryan. Who was his wife? Mary?
Mary Ryan.
Mary and Cal.
And again,
Yep.
Girls, describe the Ditch Plains camp, where it exactly was.
It's down on Ditch Plains Road, of course, and right on the ocean. It was a beautiful location. We thought it was terrific. We'd get up in the morning and head right down to the beach, and there was an old lifeguard there, an old Russian man. He was there year after year after year, and I cannot remember his name. And we were safe. Fred, but that probably wasn't his real name.
No, it was
Probably
probably
with a Russian
Slavic.
with a Russian. And we were permitted to go to the beach without our parents because we were safe there. All the kids were hanging out there. And we swam in the ocean. I'm sure it was bitter ice cold, but I don't remember that.
The beach
Girls,
was
I
lovely
want-
then too. It was so flat.
Yeah.
The erosion
Much
was
bigger.
really taken
Much
a lot
of
of it away. And the
I
Coast
want-
Guard station was there too.
Okay,
An
I
active
just
Coast
need to
Guard station.
interject for a minute. I want each one of you,
To
Pat
introduce.
introduced herself, but each one of
Oh,
you, your
okay.
name and what.
All right, well, I'm
say,
Judith.
And then the free talk is great.
Okay, I'm Judith Ceslow, Judy, and I've been living permanently in Montauk since 1956, when I married and moved out here, and I'm still here. I had a a short hiatus of living in the Caribbean in Tortola for about 16 years, which was very nice. I call it very much like Montauk down there, except it's got palm trees rather than pine trees. It's the same easy lifestyle, and people can do whatever they want and live however they want.
I'm Nancy Neff, the next sister. I've been out here year-round 35 years. I was the one who was gone for a while, not institutional.
No.
But I've spent every summer of my 65 years in Montauk.
My name is Dolly Bistrian. I live now in East Hampton. I was married in 1964 and left Montauk. So I lived here, went to high school here. I lived here permanently from about 58 to 64. I'd come back to visit all the time.
I'm curious how everyone got here. You summered here, but I'm curious how you all ended up coming back
I met
here.
my husband out here in Trails End. And married him shortly thereafter, in 1956. And Pat met her husband out here too.
Also in Trails End. It was the
It
spot.
was the hot place at that time.
And I married in
Surfside.
59, and even though neither my husband nor I were native to this area, he loved it. He loved the fishing and the lifestyle, and a lot of my family was here, and my background was here every summer also, as Nancy said, from the time I was born. I think we missed one summer because Judy had to go to summer school in New York.
No, you were out here, but I was in there
Oh,
by
okay,
myself.
sorry. Sorry to bring up that
Summer
unpleasant
school.
memory.
I do remember that.
And I've lived here ever since. I'm a very lucky person because my marriage brought me 6 daughters, and some of them lived away from here for a short time before their marriages, but they all moved back here, and amazingly, their husbands loved it here too, even though they were from out of this area, and so they all live here. And I have 13, well, it'll be 14 any minute, or any day now, very soon, 14 grandchildren who also live here. So, as I say, I feel very fortunate. Sometimes people tease me about the numbers that are descendants of mine, particularly Mr. Kerner at the school, who claims that expenses at the school would probably be a lot less if the Smyths were involved there. But I did my part. I taught there for 18 years, so I feel like I paid back whatever.
Judy, you want to talk about your kids and?
Oh, I have 3 daughters. Only one lives in Montauk, Jennifer, the youngest one. One lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, and the other girl, the oldest daughter, lives upstate. And I have 4 grandchildren, and I'll have no more. This I know.
Never say never.
Well, it would be a cold day in hell. And my daughters all went to school out here at East Hampton, the public school in Montauk and East Hampton High School. And they all went away to school after high school. And back and forth to Montauk. One worked on a boat for a few years so she could sail to the Bahamas and spend winters down there. But she's living right in Montauk now. And my older daughter spends a lot of time here also. And the one in Vancouver doesn't go, it's too far.
Yeah,
What was the question?
when you married,
Oh.
where your family is?
Okay, living here, met a gentleman who was in the Air Force, and we eloped to Boston in '58. So I got out of town, as I said, not institutionalized, but I was out of town for a long while.
Well, it was the institution of marriage.
Okay, but that's fancy.
Nancy, you
You're
also have to
editing
say, and he worked at Trails End. Now,
He worked at Trails End, but I met him at Surfside.
surf and sand.
Surf and
Which he
sand.
was also working at. Have 4 living children, 2 in Montauk, 2 out of town, and I'm the quiet one. I'll pass it to Dolly.
I have 3 children, and they were all schooled in Amagansett, East Hampton. They did not go to Montauk. married Barry Bistrian from Amagansett, local family, and first lived in Amagansett and then moved on to East Hampton.
So,
He's the only local one, Barry.
let's talk a little bit about specific memories while at the campgrounds, any of the hurricanes, any of the scary things. or
Oh,
anything
yes.
that happened.
Hurricane Carol, 1954, was my 16th birthday, August 31st.
You're giving your age away.
I don't care.
I remember that well.
And so the surprise party they had planned for me did not take place, as the roof blew off our cabana and all the gifts went with it. They were hidden up in the beams somewhere.
And
And
the
the
trail.
trailer turned over.
Yeah.
And the cake, I think we did have a cake.
But you had a great day because where'd you spend the day?
At the Coast Guard
Coast Guard
station. And at 16, that was probably like a little bit of heaven.
And they had ice cream.
Yeah. That's the only hurricane I remember, other than,
Talk about the visual, like remember the wind, the water.
oh, the wind, the water. Everybody's place blew over. Your belongings were scattered everywhere.
I think there's some pictures of
There was
There are
another
some
hurricane
pictures.
because we all went up to the hills, the high ground, remember?
Yes,
Oh,
that was
Helen was
before
with us.
that.
That was from when we were in the hills staying there, we went up to Golden's
At the
house.
state park, there was another hurricane. Our vivid memories.
Yes.
Which planes? I wouldn't remember Hidden Hills.
Because another hurricane we spent up at the school, I don't know what one that was.
I do have a recollection of one.
How'd you feel? What went on for security as a kid? The fears, anything at all, or was it excitement?
It was exciting.
What
It was
do you
exciting.
We were too young, we were teenagers
To
or
realize
teens
any
to realize
fear.
any dangers or fears of it.
The wind was fierce, I do remember that, and I don't remember if the Coast Guard fellows came to get us or if our father took us.
No.
Dad took good care of us.
The Coast Guard men were sleeping when we got there. It was early-ish in the morning, and Dad.
Dad ended up
said-
evacuating
It
some other
wasn't,
people.
yes, there wasn't the same warning system that we have now.
No.
And that Coast Guard station was close by, where the parking is now for Ditch Plains Beach. My father went over there to see what word they had about possible weather,
Danger from the
danger and so
hurricane,
forth.
yeah,
And they
from
were
the water.
very blasé. They were young men. I'm not sure who was in charge at that time, but they were young men. And he told them, there is a hurricane coming. He had the news on the radio. And so they allowed us to come in there for safety because we were all in tents over there.
I remember the water being up into the campground.
Yes,
I
The
remember
ocean
the
was
waves
up.
hitting the Coast Guard building.
yes.
Oh, yeah, it
Yes.
was up high.
Yes, it was a
Your
fearsome
dad, and
storm.
I believe it was Gene Pardini, he must have been a young man, evacuating people from
Gene,
Gene.
the father?
Well, the
Oh,
father was there too.
Yeah. But I remember somebody tall, a young man.
And bringing us over and getting other people out. And I think Montauk was cut off, Neff was awash at that time for several days, so that going back and forth was not possible. Of course, we thought it was wonderful, it was exciting, we wanted to go out and walk in it, we had to be warned not to. I remember the eye of the hurricane, the light, the eerie light, and how calm, it was a
Everything
very,
grew still,
yes, very unusual calmness.
and it switched,
Mhm.
turned
The
around,
wind
and then
swung,
came the other
Came
way.
the other way.
I don't remember how long it lasted. I think we were in the Coast Guard station all day. I do remember being back in the camp at night.
And it was a mess.
Yes, everything was scattered everywhere, not just ours, but everybody who was living over there.
And riding down to the dock area, many of the boats were up on land.
On land.
The water had come
Tide.
so high, damaged. Probably now I would be frightened. I wasn't then.
But you don't live in a tent anymore.
I don't.
Oh, we don't live
The campers.
10
were
feet
very
from the ocean
aware
Right,
of
with them
that's
because
right.
of that.
Right. Yeah,
Well, we
that was
must have gone home then, we must have gone back to Queens after that.
No, we did not. We stayed.
When we were in, we stayed in that one of 54, we did stay.
We stayed.
Oh, right.
Because I remember we had cheesecake the next day.
The next day, I guess, it was the next day.
When things got tidied up a bit between our campsite and next door to us.
But it would have almost been time to go back to college
Yes,
for
that
it
was
anyway.
the
It was August
31st,
31st,
yeah.
so then school would have started in a
Right.
week or so.
Mhm.
I don't remember that.
But we did stay, we didn't pick everything and go home. We stayed for whatever we had to stay for.
Ditch Plains. And many of the people who were camping over there, whether it was in a little cabana like we had, wound up buying houses in Montauk and living here. All of the Leahy crew
Okay,
Oceanside.
Mm-hmm.
and all those 7 sisters, Helen Leahy and her husband Jim and their children,
Joanna said.
Sip, yes.
She's
Mm-hmm.
one of the originals over
Brooks. Our next door neighbor in Ditch Plains was Fred Brooks and his wife Dot, and their 3 children, Bobby and Freddie
And Richie.
and Richie. And they bought houses and lived down here.
And their mother-in-law.
And the grandmother,
Nana
Kurtz.
Kurtz. Nana Kurtz.
she was a character.
They all,
Had all come from Woodside.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And Dot played one of those wash tub jug band instruments. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so who else was in that music group that just kind of added to that? Was it one of their friends? Fred was he was a policeman.
Yeah.
Motorcycle policeman in New York. And they had friends that would come out. I think one of their friends also did some kind of instrument playing. And we had some good times
It
for
was a
that.
good party.
Multi-generation.
Every night.
Every night.
Happy hour started, it never ended.
It was a happy time though. It was a good relaxing time.
I have a great memory that stays in my mind of the house at College Point with the big piano.
Oh,
Now,
yes.
who was that, your mom or your dad? Your mom that
My
played,
my
yeah.
mother's piano.
And it was always.
Took up about
music
3/4
and
of the living
happiness.
room.
Yeah, yeah.
You were in there, Joan?
Sorry?
You were at College Point?
Yeah, I was there a couple of times.
No, she came to visit us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when we came out here in
Yeah.
winter or in the fall and we
Maybe
had
it
no
was when
place
I
to
was
stay,
living in
we
Jackson
stayed.
Heights, was it?
Maybe.
We stayed
With
with
Lily?
Lily, yes.
But I do remember, and what a happy.
Oh, my mother would sit down at the drop of a hat and play
Anything.
anything. She'd play
Sing-
anything.
Sing a line, she
Sing.
played.
She'd play it.
Yeah.
Pat had that piano for a long
We
time.
still have it.
Still have, Pat still has that baby.
Talk a little
grand.
bit about your mom and dad and when they came. I know your dad was a fireman, but when they came out here permanently, and what they sort of did. Were they totally retired when they came out or not? So
My father
Permanently.
was. He retired from the fire department.
20 years he left.
Gone.
He wanted to be here so bad.
And I was already living out here with a baby on the way.
It was 1958. And actually, Mom was still working in New York because you were attending.
And I was going to
Yes.
school, I was going to Queens College,
Right.
so we stayed with my grandmother in College Point. Mother loved her job, she was not a happy person to move out here year-round. She had her group of friends and her activities and her work. She had a nice job. But Dad was firm,
He wanted to be
That was
here.
his dream
That
to
was his
come out here.
retirement. So they rented several different houses over a few
Hayden's
years.
house
Hayden's house up
in
in
Lower
Shepherd's
Shepherd's
Neck.
Neck.
And one winter they lived in a house on East Lake
Yes.
owned by
Dennis,
Finley.
Finley.
And
And while they were building their house on Old Westlake Drive, which probably now you would never get a permit for. It was surrounded by wetlands and creeks and streams.
It was wet.
we would stay at
It was
Ditch
wet.
Plains until the weather.
Yes, till the weather was absolutely unbearable for staying in a little
Did you go to
cabana
Smyth?
like that.
Yes, which and I did.
Yes.
John used to pick us up in the morning with a car. He had
Two younger ones
14,
went to
but
high
he'd
school.
come down and pick us up in your dad's car, I guess,
Yeah,
and drive us to the bus stop, which was on Montauk Highway.
right. Yeah, right on the
Yeah.
swings in the corner. So what years were those? Late
That was,
50s,
late 50s, yeah. 58 and 59.
The folks, I think, came out here, they said in 1932.
Yes.
And I don't know who introduced them to me.
Ed and Lil
It
Golden,
was
who
Ed
built
and
the
Lil.
first motel in Montauk, was Oceanside at that time. They were neighbors in Whitestone, and they brought them out to the camp.
In 32?
32.
Wow.
I think my parents weren't even married then.
Yes, they were.
I thought they were married at 35.
No, because they
That
were
was
married
more.
4 years.
Or whatever, whatever. And then they loved it, they loved it out here. Ed and Lil Golden went on to buy those $100 lots in the Mead development.
Mirror development, to buy 2 lots, yeah.
2 lots.
You had to
Two
buy
or
4.
whatever the
I heard
word
it was
was.
5.
Okay.
But at that time, $100 was probably like 10,000 now. My parents could not afford what?
$1 million.
$1 million. My parents could not afford it, so we continued to camp at Hither Hills, and the friends who originally brought them out here built a little log cabin type of house up in the what they called the Mirror development, which is
And that grew.
on the old highway.
And then they brought some other of their relatives out. Danny and Todd Borum.
Oh, yes.
The Boros.
Yes.
Mhm.
That was Lil Golden's sister,
Right.
Todd Borum.
Well, there's a picture somewhere in our archives, Nancy, of a little snapshot of Mother and Dad in front of a very small umbrella-type tent at Hither Hills. That was their first residence there.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember they said it was much easier before
Mhm.
they got married
Yes.
and had children.
And all those 5 children to bring all that stuff with you.
Just the bodies were enough.
We had these raggedy cars. Bad
They
boy
were
cars.
classics. We didn't
Sometimes
know
it
it
would
at
take
the
us 8 or
time.
10 hours to drive to Montauk on 25.
That old
Flat
wooden
tire,
station
one
wagon.
flat tire after another, you pass
Dad
them
would say,
on.
don't lean on the side of the car, you'll fall out.
Yes, that wonderful Woody station wagon, which became.
probably.
Somebody used to get sick, was it you? Used to get car sick, you, Nance?
Somebody got
I think it was the dog. We probably looked like a band of gypsies, but we didn't know it then.
That's right.
And my housekeeping methods have continued. When we first started at Hither Hills, they didn't have platforms. You camped right on the dirt. And we used to put sand on it, and then every night you had to rake it. That's how you clean it. You remember that?
Yes. Yes.
Who was that big heavy guy that used to tease me when I was getting a bath? Big heavy fellow. Ernie?
Harry Clemens.
Senior?
Junior. Harry Clemens Junior.
No.
Where, in Hither Hills or Ditch
In
Plains?
the hills.
No, I was just a
One of
three.
the parents.
Yeah.
No,
Groups.
this was an older, heavy man.
Oh. It wasn't anybody that stayed there, it was a friend of Dad's.
I think so, yeah.
You know who it was.
Hermie Vick.
George Barringer.
Oh,
Okay,
of
maybe.
course.
Oh, George Barringer, the Whitestone.
Yes. My parents had many friends come and visit. They were great party people, they were good friends, and so they had many friends that would come out and enjoy their company and stay with them, and they would help do things, help erect.
Everybody would pitch in.
Yeah, it was a very wonderful community spirit.
And they would, when company would come, they would bring cooked foods, prepare pot roasts, lasagnas, whatever.
Pots and pots of food.
And everything was cooked because the refrigeration was so bad.
And
And
we only
cooking
had a
facility,
little
two-burner.
Coleman stove,
Yes,
Yeah.
a little
2-burner.
two-burner Coleman stove. Oh, and let us talk about, at night, illumination at night.
Oh, the lanterns.
Yes, we used the Coleman gas
Kerosene
lamp.
lanterns.
And that was one of the jobs in the morning. You had to check to make
Change
sure
that
those
mantle.
mantles were on and clean, and you had to fill the tank.
And
with
clean the
fuel.
glass, because it did
Yes,
tend
it
to
smoke
get
up
sooty.
sometimes, that's right. Mhm.
We didn't bother. Well, you didn't know any better. We were young, what did it matter?
Now, that was both at Hither Hills and at Ditch
Ditch
Plains.
Plains,
There
yes.
was No
No
electricity.
electricity,
What
no.
about the water at Ditch Plains? Was that pumps as well?
Yeah.
Yes, you had to walk.
Yes. We had one right behind
Yeah.
our
And they had hot
Location.
water in the bathhouse.
Yes, that was a real luxury, wasn't it,
Yeah,
Nancy?
it was.
the public bathhouse at Ditch Plains. Hither Hills had public bathhouses, ice cold
Ice
water.
water.
Ice cold
Unless-
water.
Unless you were the
So,
first guy.
we
on the
we
beach.
learned that you ran straight for the shower, the water would be warm because the sun had warmed the pipes all day, but third person in the shower was ice cold. You didn't stay too long.
And I remember in Ditch Plains, the Iceman used to come to Ditch Plains.
Yes.
It was Louis Alachi.
Yes.
It was
Then
luxury
called
accommodations,
Louis
no doubt
I
about
used
it.
to stay at Harbor, I remember. I used to ride on the truck with him.
Except they didn't have
Milkman
paved.
used to come.
Yes.
and milk
Yeah.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
bread man, well, I remember Cruz and Dugans. At Ditch Plains, they didn't have paved roads then, so when we had a heavy rain, you were in mud up to your knees. Do you remember that, Joan?
Yeah. I remember them calling it Tent City.
Tent City.
And it was a magnificent, which it still is today, but right along the ocean.
Wonderful.
Oh, it was
Ditch
beautiful.
Plains. You know, you just walked right to the end of the
Mhm.
compound and you were right
There
there.
it was.
And at Ditch Plains, the manager was Elsie Hoffman, giving me a help with the,
Duke.
Who had two children.
Yeah.
And one married
McGill.
John McGill.
John
I
McGill,
couldn't- I
right,
couldn't
Eileen.
come up with that.
No, Arlene, sorry, Arlene
Arlene
McGill.
and John.
And they're still out here.
Yes.
They bought a house, built
Mhm.
a
The
house.
son is Roger, I don't know what happened to him.
Mhm.
that's right.
I have a question. If you were, that was more like a summer community out there, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So how did you interact with the locals, the people that lived here, and was there any kind of feeling,
Ask
or did you just
You're
stay
not
to
telling.
yourself, or did you?
No.
No, we all worked in town.
When we got
as
older,
soon as
we
got
went to
older.
work, so we got to know people.
And the Air Force Base was a combiner, because those young men, many of them came, or the Army too, when the Army was there, remember, many of them came from southern states like Arkansas, Mississippi, and they really were backwoods people. And they would go into the service as a way out of that lifestyle that they lived there. And they would come up here, and of course, after their job was done on the base, whatever their job was during the day, they would be out on the town looking for company too. So there was a whole
And on the beach.
social strata of young people, including the town's children. Community was so much smaller then.
Yes.
But
I remember
everybody,
Charlie
you know,
Grimes.
yes,
used to
and
come to camp.
Margaret Burke.
Yep.
Bob
After-
Bachman.
Yes.
We
After a time, when we got to be teenagers, we wouldn't stay at Ditch Plains. We'd come into town and go to the beach where the Nix is now, because that was called the town beach, and everybody hung out there, all the teenagers, everybody, so.
And Trails End
We
at
got to
Night
know
was pretty
everybody,
much
yeah.
the spot for you and I.
We used to go to the surf club a lot. And swim
Which
in
was
the
called
pool.
Surf and Sand at that. Oh, the
No,
surf
surf
club.
club,
Surf
yeah.
club.
Out of
The
the
Manor
Manor.
Complex.
That's
And for
right.
maybe 25 cents, I forget what it was, we could swim in the pool.
Or
We
you
used
had
to
a
walk from
friend,
Ditch Plains,
you
to
had a
long
friend
boards
who
and
was
sneak
walking.
in.
That's right.
right, Paul, Nancy's husband, was sometimes instrumental in getting us an empty cabana on the beach.
Well, that's because he worked with Dick White there.
Right,
I'll just keep throwing these names.
as
You
cabana
can figure
boys.
it out.
Right. So we would be on the beach right next to that, and they would give us the signal, come on over, girls, you can, hang out, and this is an empty one today.
Yeah, that was when the Manor was still in full
Yes,
operation. and
with all of
very
its
posh.
satellite
I don't think the
activities.
surf club was still so posh then, but it was still being
Wasn't bad.
used.
The pool was wonderful.
The pool was nice.
Yeah.
And I think just like when we moved in 53 and came, once you stayed year round, as Judy did as the first in the family, in 56 or 57, you enmesh yourself in the community.
You
It
couldn't
was
help
hard for the high school. I mean, I was 16 and it was frightful for the first month, but after that it was all right. And Dolly and my brothers and sisters, which were younger, had to start school, and there was a regime that you became accustomed to and got to meet some of the local people. But it wasn't easy, say as a 16-year-old.
it. No,
Getting on that
no.
school bus and going to East Hampton High School was frightful, to be honest with you, as first
Yeah, I
month.
remember that whole year, I just wanted to go back home.
But after I moved out here and I joined at the Catholic Church, the Ladies Altar Rosary Society, and that was filled with older Montauk people, local French-Canadian people. I was the secretary for about 4 years down there, and I did get to know a lot of people. And of course, my ex-husband at the time, knew a lot of the fishing people. He had been fishing out here at that time. He had a commercial dragger, and there was a little group a large group that was here in the winter time, and whenever all the summer people had gone, and we'd have the country club, was the original old golf club, and we'd have parties there every week, dances and various themed things. So
Frank Tuma was very
Frank Tuma
instrumental in
and Marion,
providing
Ray
that.
Bimson and Jeanette, his wife,
Marshall and Ellie.
Marshall and Ellie, Gil
Dr. Robin on the piano.
and Peggy Keller. All these people were all older than I was, but this.
Became good friends.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
The Dockeries.
And then all the
Fitzgeralds.
Dickinsons with when the restaurant was open up at the ranch. What was that restaurant called? What was the name of that?
Well, before them it was Bill and Mary Cooper in the ranch.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there were some good parties up there too.
No, Nice restaurant.
At the ranch?
Yes, in the big
Where
room.
Third House is,
Mhm.
in that same building.
Probably the ranch.
I have to say, this is what I tell people. When I moved here in 1956 to Montauk, it was a much smaller town. There was no bank, there was no movie, and there was only one small store, Sears Market on Main Street next door to the Shadow, which is now Herb's. To do everything, we had to go to East Hampton. If you wanted to make a bank deposit or a withdrawal, you had to go to East Hampton.
But there was Pilgrove's Restaurant over on Second House Road,
That's right.
which is now a home.
That was just summertime, wasn't it?
No,
No, we
Ellen-
won't.
they lived there year
Oh.
round,
Okay.
the Pilgrims.
Ellen John's mother and
John's.
father, which I didn't know for years. I knew Ellen for years, and just short time before she
Oh,
died,
okay.
I found out that was her mother and father.
How did the town evolve? Like, there was only a couple things, and then what came? How did it change?
Just
there-
as it's changing now, as my sister said, my father was going to retire. A lot of blue collar workers from the city found this was great, and the children were still growing. So they retired out here, and it's still happening.
A lot of-
This country.
A lot of men who used to come out here to fish, because fishing used to be fabulous out here, eventually when they retired, they'd come out, would come out, buy a small piece of land, build a house, move the entire family out here after they retired. The first big store was White's drugstore.
Well, White's
There
was
had been a
here.
fire.
White's
Am I right?
was here.
Judy's right. After
Had
the
there been a
fire.
fire?
After the fire, they
Built
the-
something
And they
big.
built the store
glamorous.
that they're in now.
That was our first department store.
That was it. White's Drug and Department
The
Store.
building that's there now, the sort of
Yes.
A-frame.
But before that, White's Drugstore with its old-fashioned soda fountain was in where Tom's Liquor Store is now.
Yes.
That little
Stone.
group of
Stone,
structures
yeah.
there
And
that
Stowe.
Post
had been
office
part of
was
Carl
there.
Fisher's
The original
design.
stuff, and the post office was right there also.
Right, with Ted
On
Cook.
Main Street.
Mhm.
Yes,
Next
small
door to
little
the,
storefront,
White's.
not even as large as this room, with boxes along the
Mhm.
sides,
Mhm.
wooden boxes, and the old flooring,
The wooden
wooden flooring.
creaked when you walked. in.
Linseed oil must have been put on it every year.
Old black.
Old, dark.
And next door, I remember Walter Jobe's plumbing shop
Walter
there.
Joe.
With-
Probably where the,
Before that, the liquor store was there. When
yeah,
When the
Right.
drugstore was
White's,
there, and the post
the
office
post
this
office
was,
and
and White's owned
and
all
the
of
liquor
that.
store.
And then
Yeah,
ran
Dick, old Richard White owned all
But
of
then
that.
after that came the plumbing.
Yes,
Walter
well, the
Jobe.
fire precipitated a lot of that change. When they built the new Whites, then that opened that building, and the liquor store went in there, it was a larger building.
And
That
across
fire
the
was in
street
'59, I
Was the
think.
fish and tackle shop
Johnny's Tackle Shop was there ever since I remember.
and the
Oh, no,
laundromat.
it was a
And there was a
laundromat. Laundromat.
Mary Woods.
Mary
This
Woods.
is Johnny
One
and
side
Mary
was
owned that
John.
building
Yes.
together.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, she was here partnering with them, and she had, she
And
did,
Margaret Bree
for her
was the,
hotel, she.
Yes.
she used
Okay.
And of
Margaret
course,
Bree.
Herb's Market and the Shag One have been there since 1929 sometime. That's one of the stucco buildings. Everything else is
And
new.
probably Martha and Connie Green Real Estate.
The
That
little
little-
house.
It was probably there a
That
while.
wasn't there
That was
originally,
moved.
but I think it was moved, it was
I
the
think it
house
was
that was
moved,
moved
too.
there.
Anthony's on the Circle was not there. None of those buildings down in that end of town were there.
no, they weren't. Marshall's gas station was there, and across the street was Jimmy, what was his last
The
name?
diner was there. What year was that built? Which is now the Point.
That was a real diner, I think, those,
Yeah, when was that?
Craig and Clay and
They had to have moved
Parker
here.
brought it there.
And the Memory Motel was there
That was there
for a
from,
while.
no, not originally.
Anniversary.
I remember
No,
when it was built.
Oh, okay.
Cappy and Snooks. Was that her name? Snooks.
Snooky.
Cappy was a merchant marine captain.
Right.
She,
And so he put his wife in there to manage the business while he was at sea. And what a business she managed.
And then the Giordano's built all the pizza parlor and some stuff back there, right?
yeah.
Next to the
that's been a
Memory.
while.
That's been there a while.
It
It's
seems
been there a
like
while.
been
It's
there
hard to
forever.
remember how empty Montauk was
Yes.
way back. I'm going by 1956.
There were a
It's
few
hard
little
to
buildings
remember.
Started on Main Street.
And I worked for Anthony, so I was like 14. So it had to be.
And then the motels started coming, the Oceanside, Wave Crest was probably the second or third one. Oh, Masonette's was
Masonette's.
V and Sam Cox.
And they
Right
had
on
the
the
diner
beach.
too, they bought the
And
diner.
they had the
Yeah,
diner,
they had the
and,
Was the diner
yes.
built or moved
I think
there?
it was, I think Patty's right, I think it came, you
Yeah,
know,
the
the
I think it
diner.
came
Pull
all
Pull them like a
because it
trailer.
had that aluminum front, you
Yes.
know, like
Yeah.
the old.
Real diner.
And that was a really focal point for fishermen. I mean,
24
I
hours
worked
there.
during high school. I started there when I was 16. I walked in one day to ask for a job. I think it was the July 4th weekend. And the man looked at me and he said, "Here's a uniform, go and put it on, you're hired." And my father was in the car waiting for me, and I couldn't even get out there to tell him that I wouldn't be out for a couple of hours because I was working. So I stayed in that job through high school, 16, next year, and then all through college. I used the money I earned in the summer to pay for my college costs at Queens College and to buy a car. I remember buying a very nice Studebaker.
Studebaker, I remember it.
Dark blue Studebaker, terrible engine.
It got us out here
Yes,
and back again.
yes, but boy, do you
Every
remember toward the
weekend.
end, we had to carry oil in the car because we had to stop every once in a while and put oil in. It was very chancy, but of course we were young, what did we know?
What did you
And
care?
then
We
we
didn't
didn't
stop.
do 5 in the bed.
When the diner opened early, and I eventually worked the 4 a.m. to noon shift, because that gave me plenty of time for the beach afterward, and then evening time for Trails End and all those other hot spots.
And that's when I think Bert Ryan used to come and knock on
Yes,
the
it
door
was.
because she just got home and she had to go back to work.
Right, I had that uniform on. If I dared lay down, it was bad.
And Patty McGillick lived with us too.
Yes.
Yes, Pat McGillick stayed with us then, she liked it. But the
My
diner
sister
served
is
those
still
fishermen, they came in, they were quick with their orders, they just wanted simple eggs and so forth, and then off they would go to the docks to fish. And the only other place that was there then was down where Johnny's Pancake is now.
Bola's open kitchen.
Bola's.
Bola's.
Bola's. That's
That
right.
was my first job.
That's,
Bakery.
yeah,
There's
I
a
remember
bakery
you
there,
worked
too.
too. Then after a while, they put the bakery across the street.
Bola's did it.
That's a
Bola's,
few
that
years
was
ago.
Mrs. Bola.
That's a few years
Yeah.
ago.
My first
Yes, and then
job.
the Froms
That's
took
called
over, it was
Anthony's.
open.
And
Across the
Richard's
street
where
where
Anthony's is
Right.
now, yeah.
And John Rakowski had the restaurant.
What else do you want to hear about? I remember Gosman's when it was nothing but a little rectangular shaped shack. Mary Gosman and Helen
Hey.
Hegner
Mhm.
were running it.
Mhm.
And if they had a little crowd of people to eat simple things, chowders and things, Mary had to rush in the back and wash the silverware because she didn't have enough.
Yes.
I will always remember that. And next door to that was the bar. Johnny McDonald was the bartender for many, many, many years. Stayed open all winter, and he had a pot-bellied stove there to keep the place warm.
Where was that, at Gosman's?
Right there. Right now, about where the patio is.
I remember the building, but I didn't remember that it was a.
It was 2 sections. One was the diner area, the food area, and then it was the bar.
And there was a shack there on off on the dock side where the commercial fishermen would go if they weren't sailing that day, if the weather was poor or whatever. Particularly in the winter, it was like a clubhouse for them, and they would go in, and entrance to the club was a 6-pack of beer. You had to buy a 6-pack of beer and set it down on the wall. And I do remember seeing that wall covered with 6-packs. And they would come in and they would gossip, talk about fishing, whatever else, and drink their beer during the day when they couldn't sail.
And the dock area, do you remember, was nothing like
Nothing.
this today?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
No stores.
I'd have to say Salabas was probably there.
I don't think so, but that was the diner before Sal's, I think it
It was
was.
Steve
Remember the diner,
the Grease, they
Steve
call it, right down there.
On the edge of the dock, the town dock, where the town dock is now.
Yeah.
Sort of where George Watson's place is, I
I
think.
thought it
No,
was
it's up
Dave's
further.
Grill. Used to be Steve's.
No.
It was a
diner.
little
just a
diner or
little
something
tiny-
right
Right,
at the
right,
town dock.
right at the town dock there.
Yes.
Yeah,
And that was it.
that was it.
It was even before Fitzgerald built.
Oh, that was
Yes,
way before
yes.
that, because I remember that.
Mhm.
And the docks were there,
The
some of
docks
the
were there,
docks were
yeah.
there with some of the boats, the older boats.
But no buildings.
Very
It was
few
prior
buildings.
to, I don't know when, the dock was moved from down where the fishing village was.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know, you're
I don't
not
have any
anything on-
memory of
But
that.
I remember it before there was anything down there. There was a little opening where Gosman's Restaurant is now, where you sort of walk around, and that was the one boat in there, or one or two,
Yeah,
that they had, and that was it on that whole strip down to the town dock.
And
Yes.
they used to head across because Duryea's was the main spot for the boats to pull
Yes.
in and get iced up, and I think they shipped from there too.
So in our
Yes.
time, from the fifties, early fifties,
That whole area has
developed.
built up.
Yeah,
yeah.
Little by little.
And God bless Mary Gosman for having the foresight to see
Buy
what
all
was
that
gonna
property.
happen there and buy all that property up and develop that
Yeah,
business.
they're beautiful. None of that was there.
None of it, no.
No.
What was
Roundhouse.
your relationship with East Hampton? You know how we sort of have a different feel now
Well, I
for
think it
East
was probably
Hampton.
still the same way.
And how long did it take you to get to East Hampton?
20 minutes.
So it wasn't a problem.
No, it was
No.
a lot less
The
traffic.
road
than-
was-
20, we used to say 20 minutes.
It was a good road. But Dolly would have more connection with East Hampton because she went to high school in
Mhm.
there. It was a poor group of Montauk kids.
It was a little
Would be
difficult,
you and
what Joan said.
Joan's
It was
brother.
difficult to,
Mhm.
I came out from Queens and started high school.
But aside from that, Dolly, there was also a feeling that you got that Montauk kids were not
Except
valued
Yeah,
and
yeah.
honored by, even by the teaching staff and the administration and so forth.
That lasted a long time.
Mhm.
That was
Yeah.
still going on
Kids were-
through
Yeah, there
when
was a
my children
prejudice,
were going
a
to
feeling of
school.
prejudice there against Montauk.
Ignored them, they were never chosen for the teams, no matter how good they were, really.
Why do you feel
Why?
that?
Montauk was like a stepchild, orphan.
well, it was a blue collar town.
Yes, and East Hampton,
And
even
East
then, you had
Hampton.
some old families and
And
some
most of the
old
teachers
money.
probably at the high school were local.
Yes, East
people.
Hampton.
East Hampton type, East
And-
Hampton
Although
people.
Mrs. Haas taught at the high
Yes.
school, and she was a Montauk resident.
But the young people from Montauk accepted us when we came out. I remember John and Kathleen and Tommy Martin,
Right.
the Gosmans,
But most of
Rises.
you were friends Summers,
from before that.
you know,
previously,
you made a nice base and
The
then.
Prados.
Yeah.
Yep. So Dolly, your experience would be a little different than
Yes.
ours, because
Yeah.
we didn't do the high school bit out here. We became married people or close to being married,
Mhm.
working force and so forth. Yeah. And you must have met your husband at the high school.
Did.
Local boy.
And I think even the Amagansett, the students that went into East Hampton were treated the same way as
Because
most.
Montauk-
They were
Mm.
like stepchildren.
Yeah.
The outsiders.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it's changed very much.
And I
Because of
think in
social
the early
rank.
days, the
Social.
grade school, East Hampton itself, grade school, there was no middle school. It was grade school and high school, it was all in one building, which is the middle
Yes,
school
yes,
today.
Yes.
The high school was on the top floor when I went, and the lower level was from
Oh, is that
K
how it
through
worked?
8. So there was a family for 12 years
Mhm.
that knew each
Same
other,
people.
Right.
you know, and then the
Okay,
feeder
so by the
schools
time
came
high
in
school
as
came along,
freshmen,
you had all gone.
and however you acclimated, you did, but you were not considered part of the intimate inside family that they knew for 8 years.
No.
No, not at all.
It's getting better, it only took 50-some odd years. They do recognize Montauk students, they even have buses to transport them back. We allowed to
But
get
that's,
political
but
too.
that's Montauk who arranges for the buses, Nancy, has nothing to do with East Hampton.
How about any of your children and all of your children? They all went to school in Montauk or Amagansett, East Hampton, and all through the high school. Any sort of memories from any of them or anything that went on that was
Montauk
either different or odd, or how was the school?
was much smaller.
But not
Montauk
always,
public
because
school.
we had the students coming from the Air Force Base, and the population lists for the school show that at some time
It
there
was
were
nothing like it
400
is now.
students there.
No, Patty, they didn't have enough classrooms for that, it wasn't anything like that, they had maybe 200.
Well, we have smaller classes now, that's something that educators look forward to, having maybe 15 maximum in a class if possible.
I remember when they had to put the classroom out in the back,
The portable
the
classes.
portable classroom.
And the interior of the school has been changed a bit to accommodate the offices and the library. That used to be the gym / lunchroom.
So when the Air Force comes down, A lot of,
Yes,
a lot of students.
we
Yes.
dropped
The
our
enrollment, yeah.
population, yes, our school population. The school was, I think the school was very, community friendly.
Yes.
Most of the teachers lived in Montauk.
Or
The
East
principal, Bob Fisher, lived right down the road.
And most of the teachers stayed for their entire teaching career. There was none of this moving around.
Right.
We have a lot of new
And
teachers every year,
Principal
every other
too,
year.
right.
And principals, they stayed.
Mhm.
Bob Fisher was there the entire time.
Mhm.
My 3 children went to
Mhm.
school. And they went to East Hampton. They had the, when East Hampton had their problems, they managed, they had to go to school. That was the way it was.
That was the
That's
problem.
how it is, yeah. That was the problem. But they managed.
And the bus, taking the bus to East
Yeah.
Hampton.
Because just the logistics, going to East Hampton High School and then having to come home to a different town instead of staying and being able to socialize,
Mhm.
always makes a difference.
When I went to high school, you couldn't go into sports because your parents had to come pick you up.
Right, and most parents weren't able to do that for one reason or another. It's not like you see now with the mother parade back and forth with their children. Mm.
Have we talked enough?
Okay.
What else do you want to know about?
What about like the manor or the playhouse? You
Oh.
probably know.
That was in full operation when I moved here. The manor was lovely.
It was a place to go on a date
Yeah.
when you wanted a dinner
Yeah.
date. The manor was the
It was
place
full
to go.
service. I remember going to the hairdresser there.
Mm.
Yeah, they had a bar.
Oh, they had a
Had a fine beautician out there. And the surf club was open and operating, and the playhouse was open, was closed, was open, was closed. It ran as a movie theater for a while.
Mhm.
Just don't go when it rains.
The roof was terrible even back then in the late 50s. It would leak.
Mhm. And the riding stables were there, and the ranch, and they had reactivated that cattle drive for a while, and the cattle would be driven down Main Street to the railroad station. And some of the local guys were involved in that. Craig Tuttle, Alex Joyce,
Jimmy, you
Jimmy, right? That was a fun event. And that was in the early 50s, I believe, for a few years. They
Didn't the
had
one
that.
King Boy do that also? Was it
Wendell?
Window?
Wendell King?
Wendell King?
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Jimmy Hewitt.
He was a horse person.
Jimmy Hewitt used to hang out in my mother and father's house with my brother.
Well,
When
he
he
lived
was
nearby.
12, 15. I remember that.
well, they lived right next door.
They
right?
lived a couple of
Couple
houses
doors
down
down.
on Old Westlake Drive,
Right.
yes.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, he was one of the local kids. Jimmy
Jimmy
Hewitt.
Hewitt.
Mhm. And his brothers and sisters.
Patty used to babysit for me. I remember.
Really?
This one, Eileen and George's youngest was a Patty.
Okay.
No, Mary
Nora and then Patty.
Pat. Mary Kate,
Jimmy's sisters.
something like that.
There was Jane,
And Eileen.
Eileen.
Nora.
I don't remember any of them.
Nora.
Mary Pat.
Patty was the baby.
Mary Pat, yeah.
Mhm. And Peter. There was a brother Peter.
Philip.
Mhm. And Jimmy. 6 or 7, right?
I think we can wrap it up. Okay. Anything else you girls want to share?
No.
We edited a lot out, did you notice?
Nancy, you could talk a little bit more than you did.
I remember working when the Catholic Church
Oh, yes.
started a building campaign to build the school. I worked for the entire campaign. I was the secretary.
That was
And
in
I was
Father
paid.
Carew.
Yeah, Father Carew.
Yeah.
And I was paid for that.
Mhm.
That's
That
probably
was
around
late 50s.
19, I'll tell you what it was 1958.
Yeah.
1958.
Because he was still here in 60. He married.
Did he marry you?
February 60.
And then Father White came,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Father White was next. Mhm.
And we used to have, remember the bazaars? Judy, did you work with the bazaars?
And the,
Yes, I was right in there with the Alder Rosary Society.
And the wheel of chance, they had the chance games with the wheel, and somehow, someone in East Hampton, maybe the church in East Hampton, would call down to Montauk when the state troopers were on their way to confiscate the,
It was illegal.
roulette
gambling.
wheel.
Villages, yeah.
Same thing
So
happened
we
in
would-
East Hampton, yeah.
I
Had a big
remember
fair
working, we'd
in
have
summer.
to get
With
that
the
wheel
roll.
and hide
I
it.
had to run everything down in the basement.
Yes,
Now it's the food,
Yeah.
getting it away from,
You carry her in.
Oh, it was all cooked in certified kitchens.
well, the church provided some social life for us
Yes,
at that
a
time,
lot
too,
probably.
you know?
Card games.
Yes,
I remember your mom coming to them, Joan.
yeah.
She wasn't much of a joiner.
No, but she came to the
Yes.
card games and get sandwiches and cake.
bingo, you have bingo down here?
Yes.
Not for a
We
while,
did
not
on
right
and
in the
off.
beginning.
We did in the summer, the bingos would take.
They had a very, very active French-Canadian families, which would have been the Pittses and the McDonald's.
They were the backbone of
and
the
whole
church,
family.
really.
They all were like sisters or brothers or aunts or
Intermarriage,
uncles.
not intermarriage, but related.
And they really, their whole life
Yes,
were over
they were
around
the
the
backbone of
church.
the church. They did all the repair work, they did the painting. I
Worked
remember
with the
Gus
priests,
Pitts
they did
building
the
that
altars.
nativity set. Do they still use that same nativity set? They stand out on the
Outside.
lawn?
Are they allowed to do that?
On church
Well,
property.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and
Controversy over that.
Gus Pitts.
But I can remember like at 16 or
You made that.
17, joining that same ladies' altar society, and it was and you just did, you worked the card parties,
Yes.
you did this and
The
that.
card
and it
parties,
was,
yes.
The altar cloths,
Yeah,
I never did those.
flowers,
so, yeah.
Some of
Fix
the
the
basics
flowers and
out
the
here
candles.
have changed.
and the candles, changing the candles.
I do that.
It was a very, very strong niche little group.
Yes.
Yes, and then up on the hill, at the other church, there was
Christmas fair.
an equally strong
Stuff. Fuck.
Anniversary, is that correct?
Well, that's all we were. They were
Yeah.
both built
They
the
were
same
both-
year.
They
Yes,
were?
Yes,
Well, Fisher gave the property for the
Oh, I didn't
same
know that.
architectural structures. Emergency or
An
electric
emergency.
grid. Yes,
We
they
would
did
do
have
without.
needs.
We would do
Okay,
without
we're
rather
on,
than
girls, go ahead.
We would do without rather than shop at that little store.
Right, but they had emergency supplies there, some meats and things like that.
Was Bellefontaine's little grocery store in the back of Shepherd's Neck there at that time?
Oh, yes, that was there a long time, because John Bellefontaine's father had that before John, is that correct?
Yes, it was his grandfather actually, I believe.
Oh, it was Marge's grandfather, Loftus, Pete
Oh,
Loftus.
you're
That
right,
was
it was
her
Loftus.
Oh, okay,
grandfather.
her grandfather.
From Greenport.
Yes, and they had the original store. He had it with somebody in the fishing village. And then it was moved up to Shepherd's
Moved up to
Neck. So
Shepherd's
I didn't
Neck.
know, I just remember it in Shepherd's Neck.
Yeah, that's
all
where I
remember
remember,
the
yeah.
house.
And they called
Pete
him
Loftus.
Cabbage John.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right, because of the affiliation with the grocery
Yeah,
store.
and then I guess that closed eventually.
Yeah, and that's actually where the houses today, Michael and Patty lived there. That's the original Loftus house.
Right.
Mhm.
Oh, good thing that
Oh,
don't
yeah,
think.
that must be nice there.
Yeah.
Oh, they
I
have.
remember going to Oak Store.
Yes.
We lived at Maiden's
The
house.
store was in the front, it was a little,
Yep.
just a little store with a
And
door
that
a
store
big
was
front
still
window.
open when I came to Montauk in 1956.
Mhm.
And that was like a community there. That was Lower Shepherd's. and
Yeah,
Upper
Lower Shepherd's Neck.
Neck.
And I can remember all the old men sitting around.
Yes.
Loftus, and
A
it was like
true
Wall-
old
Yes.
general store
It's
type.
like Mr. Hayden.
With their
and
pipes,
Joe,
yeah, Jocko Hayden,
Joe Pugh's, Eddie Pugh's father. Joe
Egan,
Pugh,
Mike Egan.
Mike Egan, and they'd all sit around and.
They were all retired at that time, Nowhere to go.
And the Pilbrow place down on Second
Second
House,
House Road.
where Enid Pilbrow and Mike had cottages in the back for rental, because there were very few places that you could rent out here at that time if you know, wanted to
Mobile
stay.
cabins, I think they
The
call them.
Mohawk cabins, my
Mohawk cabins.
my grandfather and grandmother.
Stayed
Well,
there.
those same cottages for village.
Yeah.
Where are they?
They're still there.
The cottages are
They're
still there.
yellow now.
Oh, yeah.
But the store, she had that lovely restaurant, she had that wonderful food in the restaurant. Mrs. Pilbrow was well known for her chowders and her home style
Her
meals.
cooking skills.
Yes, and
And Ellen inherited,
Yes.
Ellen,
and especially for the ice cream sodas, because when our grandmother and grandfather stayed there for their week's vacation at the Mohawk cabins,
that was a
we would be
treat.
invited over one evening, and we would go to the Pilbrow place for ice cream sodas.
I want you just to stop for a second. I want you to look at those pictures if you can talk about a particular scene and know any of the people in it, then Patty will zoom in and show the picture so we can have it on the video, okay? So I'll give them each one.
Okay. I will. Stitch plans, let's look at this one.
Yeah, the bathhouse. And that's you.
Why don't you pass the,
Here's a couple of them.
pass the sheets out, keep
This is
one.
down at the dock. See this?
Dolly can't give them up, she's like mesmerized.
She wants to pick and choose. Okay, youngest gets the first choice this time.
Oh, this is a great picture right here. This is the picnic area at Hither Hills. And and you can see it was beautiful up there. It was high.
Hold it straighter.
It's the one in the corner down. Number 19. You can see the ocean here, and this was the campground.
This is all of us.
You can see the tent.
It's you, that's
And this was the picnic area.
Where's that other wonderful picture that?
This looks like number 13 after a hurricane.
What kind of paintings was he on?
Droopy underpants.
Yeah. And Dad?
Cooking
Starting
breakfast.
food, yes.
No, cockers.
This is at the hills.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a ditch.
I don't have my glasses.
It's
Look how small it is.
Yeah, but
Yeah, that's our side.
That's small.
That's the other side. Remember an Italian family lived there, Sal? You know?
Even, you got a picture of the tent and
And this
stuff
is
like
the-
that?
This is the tent right here in Hither Hills.
It's a great picture of the tent, yeah.
Can you see that? It's my father cooking breakfast there. It was outdoor cooking.
Oh, that's-
al fresco. We were way before.
What is that,
time.
Judy? Here's
The original platform.
Right here.
Here it is, right here.
Got it? Oh.
And number 35 here, we go up and back, we camped against the hillside in Hither Hills. And they had picnic tables even then, and that's where you would often put a more formal dinner.
Keep them straight
would
so she
go
can
up.
look at them.
Yeah, you're.
Yeah, keep them as still as you can.
Well, it's-
And every night there would be tick check.
Oh, yeah.
That was an
Yes.
important part of the routine. Before you went to bed, Mother or Dad would check you all over for ticks.
Who was that in the bottom pictures?
That's my brother, who was killed in an auto accident when he was 18. And he caught that fish, and because he was the only boy amongst all us girls, they made, what'd they call him? Champ. This is the champ. So even if he caught a scrawny little fish like that, it was a big deal, and he was very proud of himself,
Give
of course.
your brother's full name.
My brother's full name was Joseph Mead, but he was Joseph Raymond Mead, but he was called Butch from the time he was born
No, that's.
until the time he died. And he's the one who named my sister Dolly when they were only 12 or 11 months apart. When Dolly came home from the hospital, he said, "Oh, is that a Dolly? Dolly?" And that's what she was. So very few people know her by Kathleen.
Even Dolly doesn't remember her.
She
name.
does Kathleen.
She was reading that news article about a Kathleen Bistrian once, and
Yeah.
she said, "I wonder who that is. It must be a relative."
You know, that's the big dock.
Yeah.
Gets a couple of those on the bottom.
Yeah, number 16 here is the old hangar dock on a,
On the bottom there?
yes, pointing with the finger, and holding it still, notice. My younger sister and brother floating, and they just redid the dock. What do they call it now?
Eddie
It
Eckers.
used to be called
State
the
Park.
hangar dock at the end
County
of
Park.
Navy Road over on Fort Pond Bay.
No, that's
Echo Park.
Is that
Not
what it's
Ecker
called?
Park, it's Benson Point Park, I believe, but it's Eddie Ecker
Dock.
Memorial
Dock.
Pier.
Mm.
Oh, the pier. And they've rebuilt it. It was falling apart then. This is left over from the Second World War.
We didn't talk about that Navy Road business
No.
at all. That was a wonderful,
Well, that's, we don't want anyone to know it's there.
I think we all learned to swim there. I think we all
The
learned to swim
original
that beach.
concrete road is still
We
there.
would
They
go
don't
all the
do
way
that.
over to where the
They
hangar
used to.
was and
Yeah.
the big concrete apron, and then the apron ran down into the water, I guess, for the
Seaplanes.
planes,
Yeah.
seaplanes. And we'd go over there and swim.
All
It was
day.
so
It was-
private.
It was wonderful.
Now I live up there. Very close to
And the
that.
dock has been replaced.
Repaired. Mhm.
They didn't take it all down.
But that beach strip along there that is now part of the town
It is.
beach on Navy Road, very
Right.
I don't know. Why is
enhanced,
it
but
put on the boat?
popular with local people
We
even
had
now.
They
party
used to
all
say
sailing today.
periodically, the whole group would go fishing.
Oh, Lester
Sure.
Bean.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Oh,
that's
a no-no.
totally a
And see, this is after hurricane, because
Yeah.
there's something tipped over, but our house is
Yes.
still standing. See this right there?
Where is this? Is that Ditch Plains?
Yeah, this
Is
is.
it a good shot of your house? Can we put it in there?
Yes.
Because there would be structures like this in Hills.
Ditch Plains.
That would be Ditch Plains.
Probably the walking dunes or somewhere like that.
Mhm.
This is,
Yes, it must be.
Yeah.
There's a funny story. that
There's somebody
Nathan
extra there
house,
because
Here
there's
we
6
go.
of us.
The
So
little
that's
portable
me, that's you.
house that we used to
That's you.
put together
That's Dolly.
was
No, that's
bolted in panels, and we had an old uncle, he
Probably
wasn't
Nancy.
really, but
One of these
wartime and
books.
whatever, he had a very bad case of shakes, and we used to tease that he could bolt the house together faster than anyone, because he just go like this. But it shakes in pieces, yeah, yeah, it did, it got better.
Uncle
But
Jack
that house
Flanagan.
was one of the first modulars.
Now, is that Heather Hills or is that?
That's Ditch
This one
Plains.
is Ditch Plains, yeah.
And I just can't imagine, what is that now? That's down at the dock,
Yeah. Montauk Sport.
fishing. It says
Fishing,
Montauk
charter boat,
Fishing.
okay.
And then it says charter boats.
The building might not still be there, but that was,
I don't know.
there wasn't much down there then, God, I don't remember that. And some of the luxury accommodations, we lived over here, and this is at Ditch Plains, and the nearest bathhouse, and that was your toiletries, your showers, your everything, so you had to be swift. It was a distance away, but much closer than it was in Hither Hills.
Well,
Yes.
in the hills, we were much, much younger, so my mother, we had a little chamber pot that we kept for the middle of the night. Yeah.
Mhm.
You think that's the bathhouse, Nancy?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Okay.
yeah, this is where we must have just arrived here.
Right in
because
front.
We're still
Yeah.
dressed in
Mhm.
city clothes with shoes on.
That is cute. We were mighty small then.
Those were the mom and the school.
This picture, if you're still running, are you still running? Picture number 2, right over here in the right-hand corner. We have just,
Top one. The top one or the bottom one?
top, number 2, right here.
I can't see from
Kid Golden.
there. Okay.
That's us just arriving at Hither Hills, so that's the rear end of the trail, of the homemade trail that we had packed up with all our supplies for the summer. The 3 little cherubs.
So who's who?
Pat, point to, Pat is there,
Right here,
tallest one,
Judy and Nancy.
Nancy.
And my dad. And this picture shows us at Ditch Plains. This was the trailer Dad had gotten from somebody, and it was a pretty homemade affair. And we girls, that was the girls' dormitory, they called it, and there was a slight platform in between. And this was the main building, the one that Nancy considers the luxurious accommodations. And there's our old Woody station wagon. And there were times when some of us would have to sleep in the back of the Woody because guests would take over our dormitory
The
back
bunkhouse.
here, the bunkhouse, yeah.
That's where I spent my honeymoon. It was a wonderful place. I kid you not. In bunk beds. And a little glass from the past.